What is up, everybody? It's the tier list. Before we get into this, I kind of want to give my criteria for like how things are rated. I think a lot of people are just going to look at the ratings and be like, oh, this is BS, Edmund's not SSS tier. I'm looking at this from, first off, a free-to-play perspective, someone that doesn't necessarily have all of the pieces of Exodia. Very much from a challenge quest, main story boss, you know, that kind of thing. Not for farming. This isn't for farming at all. I don't even see the point of making a farming tier list. A free-to-play farming tier list would just be this. When we look at the 1 to 3 stars, I'm going to assume they're NP5, because pretty much everyone can get these with the exception of, you know, things like Mori and Izo. And when we look at the 4 stars, I'm going to assume they're, you know, NP1, NP2, NP3, somewhere in there. But the welfares I'll rate as NP5. And for 5 stars, I'm going to assume NP1 or NP2. But this is the big thing, and this is what's going to affect this whole list. This is going to trickle down into the 1 to 3 stars as well. I'm not going to assume the user has every rare thing. They might have most of the 1 to 3 stars, but they're not necessarily going to have their own Scatty, their own Waver, their own Merlin. They can summon a copy from their support list, for most bosses anyway. But so when we rate Edmund Dantes, for example, I'm going to assume you have Edmund Dantes, but you don't have Scatty, you don't have Waver, but you can summon one from the support system. But that means you don't have double Scatty necessarily, so no Exodia for you. And when we rate Scatty, I'm going to assume you have your own Scatty, and that means you can summon a friend Scatty, and so no, you can do double Scatty, but that doesn't mean you have MLBK Scope, that doesn't mean you've got Edmund Dantes or Lancelot, etc. And one last thing, don't take this too seriously. There's no such thing as a perfect tier list. You know, so many things are affected by what other units you have, what rare things you have to complement the non-rare things you have, and so on and so forth. So it's like there's no perfect ranking system. But yeah, let's just jump into it. We're gonna start with the 1 stars and work our way up. Alright, first up we have Charlotte. Pretty low on the list, you know, not D tier or anything, but not great. And the main reason for that is her toolkit is purely DPS. She can survive an NP on her own with her evade, which is nice, and that's generally what you're looking for out of a DPS unit is, you know, decent damage, abilities, and a way to survive an enemy's NP. But because she's a 1-star, it doesn't work so good. You don't really want your 1-stars to be raw damage dealers, because they don't have the stats for it. You know, you'd rather have utility or, you know, just good support skills, things like that. She has an okay toolkit, it's just she doesn't have the stats to back it up, and then her NP's not upgraded, so she doesn't compare very favorably to a lot of the other budget assassins, a certain one in particular. Blackbeard, similar issue as Charlotte, you know, very damage-focused kit, he's AoE, he's got good skills to support that, although he has no survivability, which is not great, and then again, he's a 1-star, so he doesn't really have the stats to back up his toolkit. He's got a nice niche though with the anti-bronze, sometimes that matters. He's mostly a farming unit though, so in challenge quests and whatnot, he's not that useful. He scales decently well with Grails, but yeah, he's kind of just meh. Next up is Regend, very similar to Charlotte, 1-star with a DPS focused kit, but he is better than her at basically everything because he's actually got an upgraded NP, he's got a good overcharge, good effect. You know, generally you're not going to use him over someone like 100 Face, but because his team cost is so low and he does have a good kit, he can be a decent, you know, gap filler. And if you do grail him, he's excellent because his toolkit is phenomenal. He just doesn't really have the stats to back it up. Matahari's pretty much a universal damage support because she does defense down, she works with Art Buster Quick. Her stats are really low. But she kind of just shows up debuffs and she's done. She also has the skill seal, which for a few bosses can be extremely helpful, like Guadia. She can make him skip his first turn gimmick, and there's been a few other bosses that's been useful for. But generally there are better supports, even budget supports, that are more specialized for certain teams, like an art team, quick team, buster team, but she's just a universal support that gives a lot of damage up. If you're able to get her NP quickly, like if you have K-Scope or something, then she can actually give the team a 60% damage plus, which is really good. The charm isn't very reliable, it's kind of just a bonus for her kit, unless you give her like a CE to boost her debuff effectiveness. She's just a nice general support that gives your team a lot of extra damage, and her team cost is super low. Alright, Asterios is next. This is kind of where units start to get a good bit better. This is probably the first unit I would really recommend you level. He's niche, you're not going to use him all the time, but when his niche does come up, he's incredibly useful. He can completely turn a fight around. You know, he mostly counters bosses with high hit counts, especially if they're AoE, but he can definitely work in more situations than that. You know, huge debuffer, makes bosses do very little damage. He's a little tricky to use, but honestly, he's a good unit, and I recommend leveling him because he can bail you out of some pretty annoying fights, honestly. Alright, we got Jason. Pretty solid kit, kind of, you know, all round. Does a bit of support, bit of damage, can loop all right. Would be a lot better as a 2 or a 3 star though, honestly, because he's a 1 star. He does kind of drop like a rock. But he can be a solid budget support. And the biggest thing about him is the fact that he's probably going to be your first Saber, because he's in the FP summon. He's just a 1 star. He's not story locked or anything, so he can help out. But now that I think about it, I don't really think he should be higher than Asterios. Rex, could you take care of that, please? I'm knocking him because, you know, he's fine. I just don't see I don't see you actually needing to use him that much once you do have Caesar or Bedivere or other Sabers. He doesn't do anything that great. You know, he's got, you know, some solid support. He's got a little bit of survivability. You know, he's got kind of a nice NP, but it's you know, it's nothing that great. So he's solid, but I definitely don't think he's better than Asterios. Okay, Paul Bunyan, pretty solid unit. The biggest problem with her, she doesn't have any like hard survivability, and because she's a 1 star berserker, she can kind of, you know, get one shot. So it should be a lot better if she had evade, guts, or invulnerability, something like that. But she's kind of a mini Pinth. You know, she shows up, she does okay damage herself, she can make other units do more damage. She can help stabilize maybe your main DPS with her heal. So she's pretty solid. She's kind of outclassed by Spartacus for most situations, but she's pretty solid. She's not bad. Okay, Spartacus. He's got some survivability unlike Paul, which is nice, so he doesn't necessarily have to be protected by like a taunt wall or whatever to get his job done. You know, he's got a nice kit, he's got damage up skill, he's got ignore armor, upgraded NP. You know, he's pretty solid for an AoE berserker. The only real issue is a lot of the times you're better off maybe with Darius, some of the 3-star berserkers, just because they have higher stats. But I mean, for his team cost and everything, he is very good, and he's a great farming unit as a bonus too. So yeah, good solid berserker. He's rated so high on this list though because it's like, you know, for all the 1 stars, he does the best job at being a damage dealer, and he works against almost any class. And even in, you know, some pretty extreme challenge quests, he can be very useful just because of the armor ignore and that kind of thing. And he can just get his NP so quickly. You give him like a basic 50% starting NPCE, and then you use his battery skill, and he's already almost ready to NP. And then you could use Shakespeare, Asclepius, something like that, and he can already NP. That's very handy, and he's just such a low cost. But yes, you know, there are other berserkers that are also budget friendly that can do a similar job. But I don't know, because of the battery, sometimes I think he's even better than Darius sometimes. So yeah, he's good. He's very good. So this is the first unit that I would say everybody needs to level, just period. Whale, free to play, doesn't matter. Everyone should level Arash. He's just got such a good toolkit. He's so helpful for farming. He's still good for challenge quests. You know, just being able to just quickly throw out a bunch of AoE damage and then have such a low team cost, and then let you control when a unit from the back row comes to the front row. You know, very useful toolkit. The only reason he's not tied for the best 1 star is because, you know, he is pretty much limited to AoE challenge quests or Sabers and Berserkers, and he's extremely good for that kind of thing. Where Mozart can be used for, you know, almost any kind of fight, AoE, single target. You know, Mozart doesn't even have to be on an art team. So yeah, Arash is very good. I think everyone should level him, but he's not quite the best 1 star. That would be Mozart. So Mozart is just incredible. His second skill sucks, but it doesn't matter because his first and third skill are just so good. You know, he's just makes your art units hit super hard with his first skill. Great with Robin Hood, stuff like that. But then his third skill, that's the real winner. And he makes 50 stars, so he removes all RNG. Your whole hand will crit no matter what. You know, it's very flexible because you can just not use it if you don't have a good hand. If you're using the switch mystic code, you could keep Mozart in the back and wait until your crit units got a nice hand or their skills are ready or whatever. Then you switch them in and use the third skill. You know, boom. He's just, you know, very simple toolkit, but it works very well. You know, he's in my videos all the time. He's in a lot of the other 1 to 3 star players' videos all the time, you know, because he works very well. And he has great synergy with a lot of the other, you know, staple, you know, budget units anyway. So it just works great. And even with a lot of rarer units, you know, the guaranteeing crits thing is extremely helpful. So yeah, he is just a fantastic unit. Hold on, I think we forgot one. There we go. So, pretty big contrast between the 1 star and the 2 stars. With the 1 stars, you know, really none of them were like super low tier. You know, some of them were, you know, phenomenal, but it was pretty much C up. Where with the 2 stars, you know, there's some bottom feeders. So we'll just start with Phantom. Phantom is terrible. I feel really bad for the 7 Phantom fans out there.
There are dozens of us! Dozens!
He's almost unusable. He has a triple quick deck, only a hit count of 2, so he doesn't really make stars or get good NP gain off of them. His main thing is having a charm, but it only works on females. His third skill makes it more likely to work, but it should just inherently have that success chance. So he basically has 2 skills for 1, but that 1 skill only works on female bosses, and it can still fail. His first skill debuffs him with a defense down and doesn't make that many stars. His NP doesn't hit very hard. He's just a terrible unit, arguably the worst in the game. I like him, I wish he got buffed, but yeah, he's pretty crap. Benkei almost has a use, but he's completely outshined or outclassed by other units like St. George and Leonidas, you know, who also have taunts and are just way better at being a taunt wall. But his taunt skill is nice. Taunts in general are just a very powerful tool in this game and let you mitigate a lot of RNG and stuff, so they're very useful. And you know, skill seal's nice, NP seal's nice, that stuff's not bad, it's just on its own, it's not good enough, especially when his third skill cooldown is so long, his NP does no damage. If his NP did damage, that would help him a lot. But, you know, even the stun on his NP is unreliable. The curse is pretty much pointless. He's just, you know, bad stats, purely utility-based servant, but none of the utility's that strong, so he's never really worth using unless you just need an extra taunt wall, which normally the other taunts that are out there are good enough. So, you know, honestly, with some, like, basic buffs, he's a pretty fixable unit and could become a lot better easily, but right now, he's just, ugh. Angra... The one good thing I'll say about Angra is, you know, he is an Avenger, and sometimes you just really want an Avenger, but he's not even that accessible because, you know, he's a 0 star technically, and his pull rate in the FP Gasha is terrible. It can take you like a year to get this guy, and he's not that good. He does have a niche with his NP being true damage. That's only come up like twice ever. So, at Bond 10, he's a bit better because then he can kind of do his third skill a bit more freely. And, I mean, for real, his third skill can result in some pretty big normal card damage if you can set up crits and stuff, but there's a lot of other units that can do that kind of thing that are just going to be more reliable. The only real thing I can say that's, like, good about him is if he is your only Avenger, he still does okay against rulers. I mean, not phenomenal, but, you know, it's something. But yeah, he's pretty much worthless outside of just memes and, you know, literally like 2 fights where he's been okay. I didn't really go into Angra's kit there, but it doesn't matter. You know, he's got debuffs, they're whatever. His stats suck, his NP normally will do 2k damage, you know, there you go. My boy Sanson. I love him, but he's about as useful as a rubber lawnmower. Whoever designed Sanson, I think, just hated him because he has an ability to do bonus damage to human, and almost nothing in this game is human, it's humanoid, like servants are humanoid. And they've made other characters since him that for like lore reasons have a similar ability as him, and they always make it anti-humanoid. But they've never gone back and changed it for Sanson, so his third skill basically is irrelevant and does nothing. His first skill rarely does anything, but it does bonus damage to evil, which that at least pops up sometimes. Overall, I swear they just hate this guy because his kit is a mess. His second skill is his best skill by far. It's a heal and a debuff clear, which is nice because budget teams don't have much debuff clear, but that alone doesn't really make him good, and his deck is terrible. It's triple quick deck, but his quick hit count is only 2, so his NP gain is terrible, his Stargent is terrible, his damage is terrible. He's just filling up your deck with terrible cards. He's got an okay NP, it's upgraded, has a large defense down. It can be good to like overcharge other NPs and make them do even more damage because of that defense down. Unless you really need a debuff clear, there's almost no reason to use him opposed to another certain assassin. Bad unit, send help. Salome, very niche unit. Install setups, she can generate a massive amount of NP once her third skill goes off, but it's hard to protect her for that long. But I mean, the payoff can be really good. And some fights, you know, it's kind of easy to stall in them and things like that. She's one of the few characters with a dot gimmick that it can actually work and be somewhat practical. But she's pretty tricky to use with her removing, you know, her defensive abilities. There's ways around that. You know, you can use command codes to eat up the debuff and things like that. She works well behind taunt walls, and you can use mash, because, you know, mash has a taunt as well, and mash can throw out, like, her defense buff to kind of let that get eaten up instead of like an invulnerability or an evade if you need to survive an NP. So she is workable, kind of slow, but the payoff at the end is really good. Like at the end of your taunt wall chain, you put a DPS to benefit from her third skill, so she gives everybody their NP. But not every fight, you know, you can work in St. George Leonidas Mash, you know, then a DPS. So, you know, a bit limited, but if you can protect her, you can get some pretty good value out of her. Alright, Blood Axe. Honestly, Blood Axe is good. The biggest problem is he's so similar to Spartacus, and Spartacus is just better in a lot of ways. A big issue is the fact that Blood Axe does not have an upgraded NP, but Spartacus does. You know, they both have damage up abilities. You know, Blood Axe has got the attack up on his NP, and he's got the defense down. Which, you know, it's nice, and it helps other units as well, which can, you know, can be good. He has a niche. He's got guts, all that stuff, but roughly Spartacus will do about the same damage, if not more, and then Spartacus is more tanky, and then Spartacus has the armor ignore, and that's normally more useful. Blood Axe, excuse me, does have the debuff removal, and in some challenge quests, you know, debuffs are like the name of the game, and being able to get rid of them can make a huge difference, so he has uses, just very niche, and I think generally Spartacus is going to, you know, help you out more. I'm hoping he gets an NP buff at some point, because I think that would really fix him. Although, you know, he's just so similar to Spartacus, I think they're always going to kind of have a back and forth like that, so I don't know. But yeah, he's alright, but nothing too groundbreaking. So something I want to, you know, clarify is the units more to the left are generally, you know, they're listed higher than the units to the right of them, but it's not, I'm not being super strict here. It's like the ones to the far left are definitely going to be better than the ones to the far right. That's how I'm rating them. But the ones that are like right next to each other, there's not necessarily that big of a difference. Kind of weird with the low stars though, because there's not as many of them. But so like in this case, I do think Blood Axe is, you know, is noticeably worse than Blackbeard. But there are going to be cases on this tier list where it's like the units right next to each other are basically tied, or even they are tied, or you know, I don't think one is clearly better than the other, but you have to list them somehow. So it's kind of just a general thing that the units, you know, more to the left are going to be better than the ones to the right. But it's not, you know, don't get too uppity about this. But okay, so for Blackbeard, pretty good unit. The heal is pretty solid, even if they're not females. You know, it's nice to just have an extra, you know, bit of more survivability. You know, his guts last forever, so you can cast it at the beginning and then cast it again later. So you know, he's pretty sticky. Got an upgraded NP, got damage up abilities, so you know he hits pretty hard. I think Medusa kind of outshines him in most situations, even with his survivability, but it can depend. Sometimes, you know, all you need is a rider that does enough damage, you know, because with break bars and everything, it's, you know, you don't benefit from doing even more damage, you know, on other units necessarily. So if he gives you enough damage to do what you need, and then, you know, he gives you that extra survivability, you know, he can be very solid. So he's a pretty good 2-star for sure. A lot of people don't like him, but he's still pretty good. Now we have Caligula, who I swear is the embodiment of the Nero fanbase. One of the stranger units in the game, and can be, especially I think to new players, really hard to understand. I might try to go in a little bit more depth with him. I'm kind of skimming over some of these units, but You know, his main thing really is just big normal card damage. You know, especially as a budget unit, he's a good way to get very large normal card damage. Can synergize well with Mozart because of the guaranteed crits. There's other ways to do it though, like there's some CEs and stuff. There's, you know, many ways to get him the crits. But for such a low star, the amount of normal card damage he can actually do is quite large. And you can do like turn 1 crits and just instantly break a health bar or pick off a boss or something like that, which can be really useful. His NP is pretty devastating, but it's kind of hard to do because it's a berserker. You know, especially if you're not using something like Waver or you don't have Waver, it can be kind of harder to get it off. But in certain contexts you can, especially if you're protecting him with taunt walls or something. And his NP can just shut down some bosses. You know, some bosses, their whole gimmick is like certain skills they use or getting their NP a lot. And, you know, he can just completely shut some bosses down. It's a bit unreliable with the NP seal. But yeah, he's mostly about, you know, really good normal card damage, you know, buff stacking, go boom, and then, you know, the NP is a nice side niche that can come in handy. So yeah, tricky to use, but it's certainly a nice unit to have available. Like, he's good, he's very good. There are a lot of like higher rarity berserkers that can do what he does much better, but you may not necessarily have them, so, you know, he's something to keep in mind for sure. Baby Robyn. So Paris is basically just a 2-star version of Robyn, which I don't really know why they did that because everybody has Robyn. It's not like Robyn's a 4 or 5-star. The only real difference is he has Pierce and Vulnerability instead of Sure Hit, and he also can, you know, reapply that Pierce and Vulnerability a lot more often than Robyn can do Sure Hit. But ultimately, Robyn just does more damage. It's easier for Robyn to get his damage, especially since they added the poison command codes. That'll, you know, that gets rid of Robyn's problem with magic resist. So there's really no point in actually using this unit unless you specifically need Pierce and Vulnerability. However, he's still good. It's not like he's bad. He's a perfectly good unit. You know, because Robyn is amazing, so just being a worse Robyn doesn't mean you're bad. You know, his thing is he gets bonus damage if the enemy is buffed, and instead of you know, Robyn putting poison on them. And you know, most bosses will buff themselves, so you can do his skill to remove their buff and get the weak point and all that. But some bosses don't, or they just won't buff at the right times, or their buffs don't, you know, their buffs only last 1 turn and things like that. So, you know, it's not as easy to work with as the poison. But, you know, for a 2-star, he can throw out really high NP damage. His normal card damage, though, is laughable.
It's gonna be a fucking street fight! This son of
but yeah, totally solid. It's just, there's not really any reason to use him aside from liking him. But thankfully, if you do like him and you want to make him work, I mean, he's, you know, he's more than good enough to get the job done. Gareth, she taunts and counterattacks. Taunt is always useful, but hers only lasts 1 turn, so she's outclassed by Leonidas and St. George for raw tanking, but she can do solid damage with her NP anyway. So if you need a mix of tanking and damage, she's a good pick. You can even save her at taunt just to like block an NP. She might even survive it because of her guts. But for pure tanking, I generally would, you know, take St. George or Leonidas, certainly. And I think that comes up more often than what she offers. Now we got Curse Arm. So honestly, really good budget unit. Again, like many of the assassins on this list, you may be seeing a theme here, is just really outclassed by a specific other assassin out there. But he is very tanky. Nice thing about him is he doesn't really require any babysitting because he's got protection of the wind. It's, you know, pretty much protection from arrows. So you can kind of just drop him. He'll probably live long enough to do what he's supposed to do. Gives you some stars, maybe gets some crits in, does his MP. The only real negative to him is his NP is not upgraded. So even though he's kind of reliable to like get his NP off and give you some stars, his NP damage is so bad that, you know, a lot of times it's not worth it. You can make a nice cleanup unit though, and you know, his team cost is low. I often find myself when I'm doing like, low star stuff against riders, is, you know, 100 Face will be my main assassin, and then he'll be like the backup, right? So yeah, he's totally solid. I do hope he gets an NP buff someday, because I think that would you know, make him a significantly better unit. He's, you know, very good toolkit, just not enough damage. Okay, so Shakespeare, you know, kind of the old school budget buster support. I don't find myself using him nearly as much anymore ever since Chin was added, and I've always felt like Shakespeare wasn't quite as good as like the equivalent for like, you know, the art budget supports and stuff, you know, like Mozart. He's still good though, you know, he's NP battery. NP battery is always really nice, and especially if you don't have Waver, you're kind of starving for NP battery. The main thing is, you know, 20% on a single unit is nice, but sometimes it's not worth the whole slot that's going to Shakespeare. I think it'd be a lot better if he could target his invulnerability to someone else instead of just giving it to himself. I'll say this, Shakespeare is a much better unit if you happen to have Poster Girl CE, which most people do not have. You know, it's not in the gacha all the time, it's a limited one. But if you happen to have it, it is amazing on him, because then you can, if you want him to die quickly and cycle to another unit, you can just not use Shakespeare's second skill, let the boss kill him pretty quick. You know, but if you want to buy some time to keep protecting your units with the taunt, then you can use his second skill. So he is very good with Poster Girl. But without it, totally solid Buster support, but a lot of times like the generic supports end up being more worthwhile, like David, you know, Hans, stuff like that, just because they have more general usefulness to the team. But sometimes, you know, the NP battery is exactly what you need, and so yeah, good unit, but been a bit outclassed, I feel, by Shin and others. Okay, Leonidas. He's a really good tank. I have him lower than St. George because George can fit into any team really easily. You know, you can just set him and forget him. Leo takes more work to set up, but he's the only unit in the game that can taunt indefinitely, which in some fights is extremely useful. He can be worth the effort. He also can still be used as just your standard 3-turn taunt tank. So, you know, sometimes you need more than George. You gotta have someone replace George, right? He can still work, you know, for that just fine. He doesn't have like the easy defense up though and that George has, but they're pretty comparable in terms of just standard tanks. And then honestly, I think Leonidas peaks higher than St. George. It just takes more effort, and not every situation you can work that in. Moving on to other parts of Leo's kit, he also offers some, you know, light buster support. You normally don't use that. It's not super impactful, and he's not necessarily going to be on a buster team. It's nice to have though. It's also worth mentioning that he can solo some bosses. If they have a high enough hit count, he can just spam his NP and basically live forever. But yeah, he's a little bit more niche than George, but incredibly good unit, and in some cases he is the best tank, period, if the fight is right for him. So yeah, fantastic unit. Alright, Chin, super good support. I don't have him listed as high as Hans, because I think Hans is more general, it can be used on almost any team, is always helpful. Chin is definitely the same, and he can be used on any team and is always helpful. I just don't think he's as helpful. Although sometimes he's better than Hans, because sometimes, you know, exactly what you need is the extra taunt or the extra crit and all that he gives to berserkers. You know, he's mostly a buster support, you know, be the berserker or no, but, you know, he can work on any team. You know, his damage cut, defense up, you know, taunt, all that's great. His MP is super unique, you know, where you can kind of cycle units and get more buffs than you would normally get, or you can just use it as a strong AoE. Great unit, super fun to play, and absolutely in certain contexts can be one of the absolute best 2-stars in the game. I just feel like Hans is more applicable more often, but I mean, Chin is, it's not, that doesn't mean Chin is rarely applicable. I mean, Chin is super good, super often, and is easily one of the best budget units in the game. Alright, St. George, pretty much the taunt wall. You know, nice low team cost, makes it really easy to work into any team. You know, if you want him to die really quickly, you can not use his guts. If you want him to last longer, you can use the guts. Gives you a lot of control over like death manipulation and when you want to cycle units. You know, he doesn't require any fancy footwork. You just click the button, get the taunt, so you know, you can wait to use it or you can use it immediately. It's super useful. You know, he just buys your team some time. He actually scales really well with Grails as well. If you want him to like use his taunt, survive, and then have it come off cooldown and use it again, because his taunt is only a 5-turn cooldown. So yeah, great unit, and just the fact that his team cost is so low and he can buy your team so much time, that makes him, I mean, just incredible. I mean, he's in so many of my videos, and you know, as a bonus, he's really nice for setting up solos, but in team play though, he's fantastic and one of the most used units, and that's why he's so high on the tier list. I mean, he's so applicable to so many situations. I'll say the one thing though is if you have Poster Girl, he's almost pointless, aside from some very specific circumstances where you need the taunt to have a lot of defense. Because, you know, he doesn't offer the team any like offensive stuff, no support. He's just tanky. He's just tanks. He just taunts and tanks. Where if you can put Poster Girl on a unit, you know, that can buy your team some time, especially if they've got survival skills, and then they can also buff the team or make a bunch of stars or whatever, you know, that's generally better. So Poster Girl does kind of make him pointless. It's just hardly anyone has Poster Girl, so I think he's, you know, he absolutely deserves to be, you know, S tier. But just, you know, bear in mind, if you do have Poster Girl, you don't need George that much outside of, you know, very specific circumstances of, like, where you need the taunt to be extremely tanky. And maybe you're fighting a caster specifically. But alright, let's get to Hans. So I do feel like Hans is overall the best 2-star just because, you know, he's so flexible, it can be used on so many teams, can be a burst support, can be a long-term support, helps Buster Art quick. Just a lot of value. Even if he misses the buffs on his NP, you know, the heal alone is good enough, and then his skills are all guaranteed. You know, ever since they buffed his 3rd skill, he's just fantastic. You know, get that extra NP battery can be just what you need, especially for, you know, a lot of, you know, people that don't have things like Waver and stuff. You know, you need that extra battery. And, you know, he gives you Stargen, he gives you crit, he gives you healing, can give you defense up, attack up, all this stuff. Just really solid. Scales fantastically with Grails. You know, one of the few units that has a pretty useful Bond CE, especially if he is Grailed and he doesn't need the extra stats. Yeah, really good. Just, I think he definitely deserves to be the top. I think before they buffed his 3rd skill, I wouldn't have listed him as the best 2-star, but I feel pretty confident that now he is the best, and he's very easy to use in almost any kind of team setup, and will be pretty impactful. So yeah, great unit. Jacqueline Hyde. Although, bizarrely, there are people out there that think he's good, but there are people that have no idea what they're talking about. But, yeah, Jacqueline Hyde is really bad. He is just terrible. So, first off, there's just, when you transform, so many bad things happen. You know, if you are normally going to use Jacqueline Hyde if you're fighting Riders, because he starts as an assassin, you need to get value out of his assassin self, otherwise this unit is just not going to fly. But when you transform, in many ways, you lose damage. Because the assassin, you know, damage multiplier when fighting Riders is better than the Berserker one. And yes, you get that large Buster up, but he doesn't have a triple Buster deck. So the majority of your cards just got worse. So, you know, good job on that one. You know, he can't cast his skills ahead of time, then transform, and then have them get upgraded. So it can, you know, that's kind of sucks, because one of the most likely times you could do like a Buster chain is when you have your MP, because it's an extra Buster. So that's a huge drawback. Some good things I can say about the unit is the stun is nice, because it has well over 100% success chance, so it's like a guaranteed stun. That is nice. The heal from transforming is nice. But the actual damage this guy does is not very good. Everyone's like, oh look, but I buff stacked him and he got some big Buster crits and it's so much damage. But you NP'd for 0 damage, right? You're in debt. Any unit, you know, like a damage unit that does an NP that does no damage, you just went into debt, right? Whatever buffs you got from that NP, you know, they gotta pay off the fact that you just did no damage. So when Jackal NPs, that could have been 100 Faces NP. Or someone else, right? And they just did a bunch of damage right there. And so now you gotta then get the crits, and that you know, you're trying to offset that damage. And again, he only gives himself Buster up. He'd be a lot better if he gave himself an attack up and all of his cards were better. But yeah, he transforms into a Berserker, his Star Absorb becomes terrible. Good luck making this guy crit if you don't use something like Mozart and things like that. And then even if you do crit, it's just not nearly enough damage to make up for the fact that he just did 0. The only good thing I can say is, you know, transforming with the big heal is nice, and his maximum health as a Berserker means he might, you know, get 2 or 3 shot instead of 1 shot, so, you know, that's nice. But it's not worth it. No survivability, you know, he's fancy. It's fun to make him work. You know, it's fun to buff stack him and get those big Buster crits and all that. But in practicality, he's terrible and requires way too much effort to support. There's a reason why basically no 1 to 3 star player ever uses this guy. It's not because we're not good enough, it's because he's not good enough. He just doesn't get the job done. And it's like, yeah, sure, you could use him with, you know, Merlin and Waver and stuff and have him do big deeps, but you could do that with basically every other DPS in the game, and it's going to go a lot better. And I have to stress this, I actually really like Jacqueline Hyde. He's one of my favorite Fate characters, and it was one of my favorite stories as a kid. So I really want this guy to be better, but he is so fundamentally flawed. So yeah, absolute garbage. Send help. He is barely better than Jacqueline Hyde. So the good thing about him is the stun. You can't control when it happens, but it's pretty much guaranteed to happen eventually. In an AoE challenge quest, you know, you're going to get pretty much 3 stuns out of it, which will, you know, that will ultimately save you a lot of health. and can be handy, but it's not nearly as handy as if you can control when this stun happens. You know, his damage output is not very good. His second skill is not good at all. He's basically just a generic AoE beat stick, but he's a caster. So why, like, what is that? And he does not have an upgraded NP, so his damage really just is not that good. His overcharge is alright, I guess, but it's not worth the fact that he basically has one skill, and yeah, he's just not very good. There's not even a lot to say. He's not very good. His damage is poor, and he has almost no skills. We're skipping over a few tiers, which kind of shows how much better these units are than the ones down there. These still aren't amazing, but you know, these are usable. You know, so Geronimo honestly has a good second skill and a good NP. His NP is upgraded, has, you know, pretty nice effects, and gets decent damage because of his second skill. So, you know, so far so good. But then his first and third skill basically don't exist. They basically do nothing. You know, he has a quick up. Like, are you kidding me? He has one quick card with a 2-hit count. It's like, wow, you might make a extra star sometimes. Fantastic. It's just so pointless. He gets a little bit of use out of the Buster up because he has 2 Buster cards, but I mean, it's like, wow, you did like 5k more damage. It's probably not even that much, really. I'm being generous here. It's just not worth it of a skill. If you look at like the value you get out of most skills, like how much impact they have on the enemy's health or your health, it's way more than that. You know, he's got an art NP, so a Buster up is just not very useful. He is saved by the fact, though, that his NP is pretty decent. His NP is nice. He's got a lot of effects on it that can be very handy in challenge quests. You know, crit down is one of my favorite debuffs because, you know, when bosses crit you, it's not great. So yeah, you know, his NP hits decently hard for a caster, but he has no survivability. You know, just giving this guy an evade on his third skill or his first skill would just make him so much better. It'd make him so much better. It'd go up like 2 tiers maybe. But yeah, as is, you know, cool unit. You know, not terrible, but not so good either. Again, better than his caster counterpart. You know, very gimmicky. You can make him work. You know, similar though to Jacqueline Hyde, there's just not much reason to do it. You know, because again, he's going into damage debt when he doesn't do any damage with his MP. He can get big damage a lot easier than Jacqueline Hyde can. He's definitely gotten better since command codes, because if you really like him, you can give him a debuff clear command code and get rid of that large defense down he gives himself. So he's not really a berserker anymore. You know, that's handy. You know, it's nice that he can have a permanent Buster up forever. You know, it's you know, you can. Basically, he's Jacqueline Hyde, but not absolutely worthless. But the other sabers are just so much better than him. I just don't see much reason to use him. You know, maybe if he gets a buff, I think buffing his tactics skill would help a lot, because his tactics skill literally does nothing for himself, and it only helps his teammates, and it doesn't even help them that much. So if you just give him some, like, you know, basic, you know, ability on that was actually useful, like evade or more damage or, you know, guts, whatever, you know, I think he'd be a lot better. So, you know, workable, but still kind of bad. Alright, Kiyohime, very popular unit, but not particularly great.
It's gonna be a f***ing street.
Sometimes you just need an AoE beat stick, and she does work okay for that. No real hard survival, though. She'd be a lot better if she had guts, invulnerability, or evade. She doesn't have that. Another big problem is she does not have an upgraded NP. Her biggest competition is Spartacus and Darius, and both of them do have an upgraded NP, which really sets her back. She just doesn't really have anything going for her. You know, she's not bad. You know, it's just, if you just need AoE Berserker, I mean, she works. But, you know, it takes more effort to make her work than a lot of the other ones. The burn gimmick's not really a thing unless you're able to set her up with some, you know, other very specific units and stuff. The stun chance on her NP is kind of nice. In an AoE situation, it's probably going to hit at least one person, and, you know, that helps. It really does. So, I mean, she's not terrible. She's just outclassed by a lot of other units, so you can make her work if you want. There's no real reason to use her in terms of practicality. Almost always outclassed by Darius, definitely. So Red Hair has a lot of the same problems that Kiyohime has, in that he's kind of just outclassed by other people. You know, you've got Medusa and Columbus, which are both AoE riders that, you know, for the most part are just better. He's got the crit thing, but it's not nearly enough crit damage to, like, make him a single target, and he's not going to keep up with, like, you know, Ushi or anything like that. If he had an upgraded NP, I think he'd be significantly better. That's one of the main reasons he's outclassed by the other AoE riders, is just they have upgraded NPs and he does not. You know, he's got a nice kit though. You know, he's got damage. He's got you know, an evade skill, so he can survive an NP on his own. You know, he's gonna do what he needs. You know, what he's there for before he dies. You know, the evade makes sure he's probably gonna NP, probably gonna get a crit off or something like that. So you know, he can get value. He's just outclassed. It's just, you know, he's decent but outclassed. Jin-Kei, very similar to the units I've just been talking about. It's just okay, but you know, horribly outclassed. I think there's a pretty glaring flaw with the way she's designed. She has absolutely no survivability whatsoever. She actually hurts herself, and she's nothing but damage. The problem is she doesn't actually do more damage than a lot of her competition. You know, a certain assassin we've been talking about is just so much better than her. You know, they do comparable damage to each other, but 100 phase, you know, repeat NPs much easier, and then has just so much more utility than Jin-Kei. Jin-Kei has almost no utility. Jin-Kei is just NP and, you know, maybe a crit, and that's it. You know, the absolutely no survivability and then just okay damage, that's just not good enough. And that, you know, she can work, you know, it's not like she's garbage, you know, she can throw out okay damage, you know, she's got an upgraded NP and all that. But, yeah, there's just, most of the other assassins are better than her, like, very much so. But she can work if, you know, there's some real die-hard Jin-Kei fans out there I know, and, you know, she's workable on a team, but, it's tough. So Serenity has a lot of the same problems that Jin-Kei has. She's definitely better, but she still doesn't have a survivability skill, which, you know, she doesn't have enough damage to justify that at all. But she does have some utility. She's got the crit down. You know, she's got a decent, you know, side effect on her NP. It's super random, but, you know, it can be handy. She can make a chunk of stars and all that. You know, she's not bad. She's got okay damage. It's just no survivability, not enough damage to be worth it. The poison gimmick doesn't really do enough to matter. But, you know, she's a solid 3-star assassin. A lot of people like her. You know, if you want her to be your budget assassin, you can definitely make it work. But the lack of a survival skill definitely makes it harder. But she's definitely better than Jin-Kei. Even though I have them placed right next to each other, I do think Serenity is a noticeable step up for sure. Alright, time to talk about Baldy. I think this is going to be a controversial placement and is going to result in some drama. But I really stand by this placement, and I really think the proof is in the pudding. You know, you really just don't see this guy accomplishing anything in any of the 1 to 3-star players' videos. He's almost never used. When he is used, it's generally in like super whale setups, and at that point, it's like if you're gonna throw all these super OP support units on a DPS, you know, almost, you know, the other Lancers would be able to accomplish roughly the same thing, and so oftentimes better than him. He's a very fun unit, but he's just super inconsistent. He requires a very specific entourage to make him work, and a lot of boss battles, you know, they're not going to allow those kind of units. You know, you're not always going to be able to use that kind of setup. He's just not very flexible, right? You can put, you know, some of the other budget Lancers, Ku specifically, in a lot of situations and have them get value and do what they're supposed to do. Baldy, like I say, needs a pretty specific entourage, and sometimes it's just that it's not going to be the right kind of situation for that. Thankfully, Hans' buff, you know, works well with Baldy, and that's probably been the most helpful thing for him. But Baldy is basically a budget Lancer that doesn't work on budget teams, and that's pretty pointless. And you know, yes, he can get big fancy crit damage, but again, like with Jacqueline Hyde, he's in damage debt from not doing any damage with his NPs. You kind of have to NP with this guy twice to get any big damage out of him. You know, if you can, you know, all that support he needs to accomplish that, you could get other units to NP twice, and they already would have done a bunch of damage, and then they do some of them work on damage as well. So he's just not really worth it. You know, he doesn't have that much survivability. He has some thankfully. You know, the sure hit's nice, the NP seal's nice, but it's not nearly enough utility to make up for how much work there is and how much RNG there is. There's so much RNG with this guy. Very fun unit though. Love the voice actor. I really hope he gets buffed. I think he needs an NP battery so he can more consistently double NP, be less reliant on things like Waver and Scatty and all that. But you know, he's good, and one area he does really excel in, I think this is really worth mentioning, is, you know, some boss battles, they'll have an anti-NP damage gimmick. That does not affect him at all because his damage comes from normal cards. And he can also kind of stock up on damage. You know, he really excels in fights that have like waves, and like if there's trash mobs before the boss or something, you know, you can NP on the trash mobs and kind of save up your damage for later. You know, like Ku or Proto Ku. If they NP a trash mob, that doesn't translate into more damage later, right? It's wasted. So that's a unique thing, and it's very good. And every once in a while, this guy is awesome. But for the most part, I think he's pretty niche. He does not fit into, you know, most teams, especially budget teams. I just think he's really overrated. I do think he's good, but I think he's extremely overrated. Basically, everyone that doesn't know anything about 3 stars wants to say he's the best 3-star. Meanwhile, everybody that actually, you know, knows what they're talking about with 3 stars is like, yeah, he's meh, and he just doesn't get used. All right, my boy Hector. He's got extremely good AoE damage for a 3-star. He's got an upgraded NP. He's got a decent amount of damage up. I like the recent buff he got. You know, the damage cut for the team is nice. It can be combined with other support units to, you know, really, you know, cut down on the damage you're taking. But he doesn't have any hard survivability. So he can't survive an NP on his own. He can kind of struggle to get his NP quickly, which is not great because that's kind of, you know, his job is to do a big nuke. But he has, you know, he's got a lot of niches on his side, like with the armor ignore and that kind of thing. He's definitely a unit that I think he either needs an NP battery or he needs a survival skill. Like if he has a survival skill, it's okay if it takes longer for him to get his NP because he's, you know, he can survive the opponent's NP, right, and, you know, still get his off. You know, or get a battery so he can get it off quick. You know, he's also kind of skill rank dependent. You know, his second skill's not really worth it unless it's at rank 10. And even then, there's some RNG. It's handy though; it can be very helpful. You know, he's a pretty solid unit. You know, having anti-debuff is always nice. Debuffs are super obnoxious in challenge quests and stuff. So he's good. He's a very solid AoE Lancer now. You don't need AoE Lancers that often, I find, in budget setups, but he's got his place, absolutely, and yeah, he's pretty good, but nothing phenomenal, nothing phenomenal. Babbage, really cool-looking unit, big fan of this guy. You know, got a few problems. I think he'd work a lot better if he was a single target. Unfortunately, this game seems to hate single target budget casters, so they don't really exist. But you know, he's got an upgraded NP. He's got some damage up skills. You know, his attack up is massive. It's, you know, 40% attack up for 3 turns, and it's on a 5-turn cooldown. That's excellent, but, you know, his attack stat is quite low, so it kind of just offsets that. He has some solid survivability. He gets his NP at a decent rate. Not super fast, though, but, you know, he's a solid AoE caster that has some nice basic survivability. You know, he's solid. He's a solid choice, because there basically are no single target casters for 1 to 3 stars. You know, sometimes he has to fill in as one, and he can do okay at that because he does have the large attack up and everything. But, you know, he's well behind, like, the equivalent of other classes that have, you know, a nice hard-hitting NP and a survival skill, you know, because he is a caster and he doesn't get his NP that quickly. But, you know, he's pretty solid. He's pretty solid. Romulus. So I have him higher than Hector because he's got the NP battery and he's got the guts. So, you know, he's pretty much guaranteed to get, like, his full kit off before dying. He does not have an upgraded NP, though, so he doesn't hit as hard as Hector. But, you know, he's got a lot more survivability. He's got, you know, an NP battery. He's got multiple heals. He's got the guts. He's a, you know, unique in that he can give the guts to somebody else, which can be very handy. You can have, a lot of times you can have him show up, you know, get his NP off, and then, you know, slap the guts on someone important. Or you can just use the gut skill on himself with a big buster up and do more damage. You know, he has a lot of damage up skills, but, you know, no upgraded NP, so he's kind of just offsetting that. But, yeah, he's really solid. I would like to see him get an upgraded NP, though. I think if they give him an upgraded NP, he's just going to be fantastic. But, yeah, he's a, you know, really good staple AoE Lancer for budget teams for sure. But as I said with Hector, you don't actually need AoE Lancers that often for a lot of boss fights and challenge quests. And if there's like an AoE element and you just need general DPS, like maybe there's a Berserker, then the enemy classes are all over the place, there's other AoE units of other classes that are definitely better than him. So, you know, good, but pretty niche ultimately. William Tell. So, another unit like Paris, he's incredibly similar to Robin Hood. I think he's worse than Robin Hood in almost every way, at least in, you know, in practical application. There are good things about him. He's a perfectly good archer, honestly. You know, he makes a bunch of stars with his first skill. He's got the debuff immunity. That's probably my favorite thing in his kit because, you know, Robin doesn't have anything like that. But he doesn't have an upgraded NP, which really hurts him. He only gets that big bonus damage if the enemy has evade. A lot of bosses won't have an evade, and then all he really has is the crit damage, which is nice. You know, he's got a large crit damage up. and a star absorb, so it's pretty reliable, but, you know, it's only for one turn. It doesn't make up for the lack of NP damage, and also the lack of survivability. He doesn't have guts, evade, vulnerability, anything like that, where, you know, Robyn does. So I think he's way behind Robyn. I think he's significantly behind Robyn. You know, Robyn's got the survivability, the more consistent damage, and Robyn also has, you know, a large star generation skill and that kind of thing. But sometimes you just need enough damage, not all the damage, and then maybe the boss is very, you know, debuff heavy, and because of his debuff immunity skill, he can be useful. And, you know, there are bosses that have, like, gimmicks where they literally evade every single turn, and he's excellent for those. When that comes up, he's excellent. But sometimes all you need is a little bit of sure hit, and Robyn has that. So basically it's like Paris. He just, he's not as good as Robyn, but he is still a good archer. It's, by no means is he bad. He's perfectly usable, and sometimes you might use him with Robyn, and that can work out. So, yeah, good unit, but not the best. Darius, he's kind of the go-to budget AoE berserker, really. But he's still, honestly, pretty flawed. You know, he can still die pretty quick. Thankfully, he has guts and a heal, so that can help him. He can get out of debuffs, which makes sure, you know, if he gets NP sealed, you know, he can still get his NP off when he needs to. He doesn't get his NP quick, but he gets it quicker than a lot of the other budget berserkers. Basically, he's the best we have for, like, a budget AoE berserker, but he's not amazing, right? Like, he could easily be outclassed if the, you know, made a new AoE berserker. You know, he's pretty vanilla. But, you know, he does what he needs to do. You know, he can generally live long enough to get his NP, especially if you give him, like, a little bit of, you know, basic protection. Thanks, you know, he's got the guts. His NP is upgraded. It's got a nice overcharge effect for sure, you know, and the anti-debuff, but very vanilla, just kind of, you know, beat stick. He's pretty much a generic beat stick, but at least he's got enough, you know, value in his kit to actually live long enough to do what he needs to do. But yeah, he's not, even though he's like the best AoE berserker for budget stuff, he doesn't compare to the best of the other classes. You know, the best AoE of the other classes or the best single target of the other classes, they do their jobs better than he does his job. But he's just the best we have, so. She's gotten a lot better thanks to a certain someone. I'm not super confident in this placement though, just because Romulus is so new. You can definitely use her in a practical way with him, but it's hard to say just how good she is. However, she is good beyond just the Romulus stuff. I think a lot of people, especially NA players, don't realize her first skill's been buffed, and so now she's got the crit up for the team, the art up for the team, attack up for the team, defense up for the team. You know, she offers a lot. She is a bit reliant though on you having a high starting in PCE, you know, but she's got a nice kit. You know, she does a lot. The biggest problem is just the fact that she's a writer, I suppose, if you're trying to do like an art crit thing. Thankfully, a lot of units you'd use her with have star absorb skills, but yeah, her being a writer is a bit awkward. The Romulus thing is no joke, though. It's a nice budget alternative to Merlin, honestly. I think Merlin is definitely better than her. Weirdly enough, though, on an art team with Romulus, she can actually offer more damage to the art DPS than Merlin does. But, you know, Merlin gives you so many other benefits that I think he's still way better than she is. But as a budget damage person, if you happen to have Romulus yourself or one of your friends does, she can be useful. But I don't think that's enough to really put her way high on the tier list. There's certain contexts where she can be, I think, crazy impactful, but, you know, she kind of relies on Romulus. But so her general use is still good, though. You know, she's got, you know, she's kind of a baby mash, but she kind of gives you more offense for an art team, you know, because of her art up and all that. I think what I'd like to see them give her is as a battery skill. She needs to get her NP pretty quickly to really get the value. And if you don't have high starting NP, and she might die before she gets her NP, and that would be really bad, or she just gets her NP too late. So yeah, still a lot of problems with her kit, but yeah, she's decent. I think she's a lot better than people realize, especially because she's got the art up, the crit up, the attack up. You know, that's a lot of support for an art team. Okay, Taiga. So she's kind of just a good old-fashioned beat stick with a bit of survivability to make sure she lives long enough to get her NP. She's got a pretty awesome skill set. You know, a lot of damage up. You know, she got the crit and all that. Way better though when it's a jungle field, definitely. But even without that, you know, she's just got a nice, you know, hard-hitting NP. The problem is it's not upgraded, so a lot of her damage up stuff is kind of just compensating for the fact that she doesn't have an upgraded NP. She does have sure hit though, which is nice. She's totally workable. I mean, she's got everything you kind of need out of a DPS for a budget team. You know, she's got a self-survival skill. She's got a single target NP that does decent damage. The main issue is just she doesn't have an upgraded NP. That's the main thing. And she's kind of just way inferior to Ku, which, that's a high standard, but, her damage output is not good enough to make up for the fact that she doesn't have nearly the survivability or utility that Ku does. But yeah, totally good Lancer, and they're very helpful. And if you happen to have your own Merlin or something, and you're wanting more, Buster DPS to work with, she can work for that. So, one of the more unique units in the entire game. I think a lot of people sleep on this guy, but his utility in boss fights is fantastic. His third skill does buff block for 3 buffs and it lasts forever. And what's nice about it, buff block is a fantastic skill, period. But most buff blocks only block 1 buff. And so sometimes it's going to work out in a way where you do the buff block and then the boss does some random buff you didn't actually want to block. And then when they do the thing you do want to block, the block is gone. He doesn't really have this problem because he, blocks 3 buffs and the duration is forever. It's kind of wild, and if you bother to upgrade his third skill, it's only a 6-turn cooldown, so doesn't have a lot of use beyond that. I mean, that utility is so good that sometimes you bring him just for that. For his first skill to help you much, you got to get it all the way to 10. Most people aren't going to bother. It doesn't really make that many stars for the second skill. His NP does okay damage because it ignores defense and, is upgraded and all that, but you don't really bring this guy as like an AoE caster nuker. You're better off with like Babbage or Cast Jakku, something like that. But for real, his third skill is so good that there are some boss fights that he can completely turn around. But if you don't need buff block, there's absolutely no reason to bring this guy. Okay, so Medusa and Columbus here, I'm kind of just going to talk about at the same time. They're both just so like borderline low A, high B plus. There's not that much of a difference between them on my list here. They both have upgraded AoE and Ps. They both have damage up skills. The thing with Medusa, she doesn't really have any hard survival, but she has the stun, which is very nice. And there are some boss fights where stun is just fantastic. But Columbus has the guts, so it's pretty easy for Columbus to live to do his gimmick. They both have NP battery skills. I really put this in Columbus's favor though, and it's close. It's not a big difference, but it's because Columbus has the star generation. He can get some crits for the team, which is nice, and he's got he gives the whole team damage up. Medusa only gives herself damage up. Columbus gives himself damage up and the team damage up. Overall, I think that's better, but they're both totally fine. They both have crit down, which is awesome because, crit down is such a good debuff, especially for budget games. It's fantastic. Columbus is bigger. He's got a bigger crit down, but they're both good enough. Really, they're super similar. They both get the same job done. If you're running a quick team, maybe you got Scatty as a friend supporter, or you have Scatty or whatever, then Medusa's going to be better. If you're doing Merlin and stuff like that, I think Columbus is going to be better. If you're doing something generic like Waver, I think it's very close, and it's going to vary depending on the boss. But I do think Columbus is a little bit better. But it's very close. This is. This is not one of my placements that I'm like, oh, I'm so confident in this, right? It's very debatable. So looking at this in post, I feel like I overrated Kid Gil some. Like, comparing him to Medusa and Columbus, they're all AoE. His charm is not as good as Medusa's stun, like, objectively. Columbus has got the guts, so he's got survivability, the star gen, more personal damage up, and still team-wide damage up. Kid Gil's only real thing in comparison to them is he's got the nice charisma, which is just a nice easy 3-turn, very large attack up for the whole team. And then his overcharge, which his overcharge is good, but it's hard to time. It's hard to use his NP when the opponent's about to use their NP or something like that. Because Kid Gil has no survivability, so he kind of has to do what he needs to do as soon as possible, because he's going to die any second. Because he is lacking in survivability, but he does have good damage. He does have a good NP gain. And although his charm is not as good as Medusa's stun, it's still a nice thing to have. But, I don't think Kid Gil is bad, but I do think I overrated him a bit, so knocking him down. Okay, Dyrmid, pretty good Lancer, honestly. I think he's very underrated. He's just outclassed by Ku, and that's kind of the main problem. He's got kind of just what you need if you need a budget Lancer. He's got an upgraded NP, so it hits pretty hard. He's got an evade skill to make sure he doesn't drop like a rock. His star generation thing doesn't really matter at all. The anti-female thing is nice sometimes. Very vanilla kit, but sometimes that's all you need. You know, if you can get a couple NPs out of this guy, you know, he can be a pretty solid nuker. You know, he used to have a nice niche because he used to be the only single target Lancer that had an upgraded NP. That was budget, excuse me. But you know, Ku just strongly outclasses him now. I really can't think of any situation you would use him over Ku, but he's still perfectly good. He's totally fine. He's not a bad unit. I'd like to see them buff him though, and you know, give him his own niche so he's not so outclassed by Ku. Okay, Rice time. Another underrated unit in my opinion. I don't even know why. I mean, he's super solid. You know, he's got a, you know, if you need AoE, he's got it. You know, he's got an upgraded NP, he's got damage up skills, and he's got survivability, and more than normal. And he's got like a baby protection from arrows, but then a bunch of health up and healing. Just solid. I don't even know what to say about this guy. It's just upgraded NP, damage up, niche against demonic, just you know, very solid AoE archer if you need one, and yeah, he's tanky. It's good. Proto Ku, so kind of just inferior to regular Ku, unfortunately, but I mean he's still a good 3-star Lancer, good budget option. You know, has okay damage, has a kind of a crit thing going on, and has lots of survivability. But I've always been annoyed that they buffed Ku's NP and they did not buff Proto Ku's NP, because before that they were kind of balanced against each other in that, you know, regular Ku would live longer, but Proto Ku had a bit more damage. It ultimately favored regular Ku because regular Ku just lived so much longer that, you know, overall that offset the damage. But now Ku has the upgraded NP, so in many ways he can have more damage and more survivability. It's just not really fair, so hopefully he gets an upgraded NP. And the lack of sure hit really hurts. However, if you are fighting a beast, his performance is extremely good, like wow. And he, you know, he can crit pretty reliably because he has a star absorb skill and a crit up, which is nice. And I will say he's that first skill with the debuff resistance, you know, it stacks with his passive, so he gets a pretty high debuff resistance for, you know, quite a while, which is nice. I found that to be very helpful in several fights. But yeah, very good 3-star, but inferior to Ku almost always. So Fergus is one of the only budget sabers that actually has personal survivability, which is very nice. He's AoE though, and for challenge quests and boss fights and all that, you generally need single target more often. So it's kind of a shame that we don't have a single target saber with like their own personal survivability. But you do need AoE sometimes, and Fergus is great for that. And he can kind of fill in as a single target just because he's, you know, a gorilla. You know, he's solid. He can live for quite a while. You can do evade, then do his second skill and have double defense up, things like that. Has, you know, totally solid damage. A bit slow to get his NP though. That's the one big con with him, is because he's a gorilla. It is kind of hard for him to get his NP. He doesn't have a battery skill or anything like that. But he can get a lot done without his NP if you want to just, you know, see red, click red. Solid unit, but, you know, definitely a bit flawed, but, you know, he's the best AoE saber for sure. Well, I mean, for 1 to 3 stars, excuse me, but yeah, very solid AoE saber. Alright, Lu Bu, so very handy unit for 1 to 3 stars, kind of a must, just because, you know, he's one of the only ways to deal with a lot of the extra classes. You know, but if you happen to, you know, have an Avenger or some of the other extra classes, you're not necessarily going to need this guy. Depending on what units you happen to have on your account, you could easily just skip this guy. However, if you are kind of screwed with some of the extra classes and stuff, and assassins, he's really good for dealing with assassins. Because there is no proper single target, you know, budget caster, and sometimes he's one of your best options for dealing with assassins and such. Does not have very good survivability. You know, the defense up is kind of awkward, although it's usable, but it doesn't buy him that much time. The biggest issue is he does not have an upgraded NP. He's kind of a go-to nuker for like dealing with extra classes and stuff, but he doesn't have an upgraded NP, which kind of sucks. He's got a lot of damage up in his kit, but that's kind of just offsetting the fact that he doesn't have an upgraded NP. His C red, press red though still works really well. You can get star absorb on him. You can totally go a crit route with him. He's really inferior to Mori when it comes to the crit route, but not everyone's going to have Mori because Mori's limited. So I really do recommend, you know, taking a look at Lu Bu. He's pretty useful. I think he could be a lot better. There's a lot of things we could do to make him better and be more useful to the player base. but he's kind of the best we got for a lot of situations. So yeah, he's very practical. Medea. So, I wish she had a proper single target NP. They gave her an AoE multiplier for some insane reason. She's still useful though because she's got the buff removal. Sometimes that's just a must. I think she's a lot less useful now than she used to be though, because Alexander now has buff removal and he doesn't even need an NP to do it. She doesn't have particularly good survivability, but she does have utility with the debuff clear. That's useful pretty often. Although her damage is kind of laughable, you know, sometimes it's the best you got for dealing with assassins. Most of the AoE casters though will actually do better single target damage than her. But she's still good. I mean, she makes it into A tier because, I mean, sometimes you need the buff removal, and especially if you need buff removal against an assassin, she's going to be really good. You know, the debuff clear is still nice. You know, she can double NP very easily. You know, she's a solid unit, but, you know, it'd be nice if she had either more damage or more survivability, like, you know, like a proper evade skill or something. One or the other, I think, would really help her out. I think because her NP's already been buffed, they're never going to give her a proper single target NP. So what I'd kind of like to see is them giving her like a 3-turn NP damage up that's very large on her first skill. I think if you gave her an art up, that might be too good, but something like that I think could really fix her. I don't know if they're going to bother, but I budget people, free-to-play people, new players, that kind of thing, really do struggle with having a caster that can, you know, nuke an assassin boss, and she doesn't quite get the job done, but she helps. She's better than nothing, and the utility is absolutely good. I'm kind of being a downer on Medea here, but for real, her utility can be game-changing in some fights. So Antonio, I feel like would actually be a fair bit lower on this list if there were other Avengers, right? If there were other low-star Avengers, but there's not. So, you know, he's kind of the only really good option against rulers other than, you know, the Berserkers. And for real, a lot of the time, the Berserkers end up doing better than him for rulers, but it can depend. He's still solid, though. I mean, he can loop his in pretty well. He's got a nice kit. The big things that stand out is he doesn't have an upgraded NP. It's AoE. You normally need him in single target situations. He does not have any hard survivability. So he can die pretty quick. He's pretty much for rulers only, for a budget setup anyway. He can work though in some AoE situations, even if there's no rulers, just because, like with Hohenheim, he can loop his NP extremely easily, and so there are setups where he can just NP over and over and over and over again, which can be very good. It is niche though. The lack of survivability is absolutely a problem, but he will very much help you deal with rulers and just, you know, if you're dealing with a lot of classes at once, you need AoE, he can be a solid choice. And especially just because he's an art unit, because some of the best budget supports are art supports. You know, it's Hohenheim, Mozart, that kind of thing, and he works well with them, so that kind of gives him a bit of an edge over some of his competition. But I feel like if they ever add more low-star Avengers, he could be pretty easily replaced. But he's still totally solid, and, you know, he's really cool looking, so I like him. Mori. So, unfortunately, this is one of those 3 stars you really can't guarantee that you have because he's limited. And Izo is also limited, but Izo's had 3 rate-ups. Mori's only had 1. So that's kind of unfortunate. Mori is very good. He has absolutely fantastic synergy with Chen. Thankfully, you can guarantee that you have Chen. So as I'm rating Mori, I'm going to assume you have Chen available to you. Works great. He gets huge turn 1 damage off. Can kind of go into his NP from there. You know, his big problem though is he has no survivability. So you either have to just, you know, do his thing really fast, and thankfully Chin can taunt someone else and buy him some time. So just fantastic synergy between the two. But yeah, very big lack of survivability, but he has very good damage for a 3-star. Mostly outclasses Lubu, but there are some situations where Lubu is a bit more straightforward, and sometimes just like straightforward MP nuking can be better with Lubu. But Mori is very good. Very fun unit. Love the voice actor. I'm super biased in terms of just liking him. He's one of my absolute favorites, but I do think he absolutely is a very practical 3-star. Even at level 70, he can really pump out some damage. But yeah, he is limited, so a lot of people won't have him. So it's kind of unfortunate there. Okay, Caster Ku, kind of the best single target budget caster, even though he's not single target. But, you know, upgraded NP, comes with a buster up every time you use it, has excellent survivability, has anti-debuff, which is always extremely nice, you know, for boss fights. Like just so often anti-debuff is awesome. And just he's got so much survivability that, you know, he can get the job done. Gets his NP very quick, has an art deck, has an NP battery skill. I wish he was single target so much. He would be exactly what the player base needs if he had a single target NP. You know, because again, if you're dealing with an AoE situation, you're normally not going to want to use a caster unless every single class you're fighting is an assassin or a berserker. So that really hurts him, but he still helps the player base a lot with dealing with assassins. Just, you know, fantastic survivability, protection from arrows is really broken. He is a bit skill rank dependent, at least with protection from arrows. But yeah, still very good budget caster. Story locked, unfortunately, but at least you get one copy for free. He's in the caster rate ups and things like that. If you're not going to go for him, I guess I would say the good stand-in would be Babbage, but I do think he is better than Babbage. But yeah, Billy Boy. All right, so overall, Billy's definitely not as good as Robyn, but he's still very good, and he works well with Robyn as like a cleanup unit or just an initial boom, do a bunch of damage. He's skill rank dependent though for his second skill big time, because so many NPs have 50% starting NP. Having exactly 50% on your charge is what lets him, you know, NP immediately, and that's what makes him good, is he can NP with no help from anybody else. Like turn 1 NP or come in from the back row and immediately NP. It's very useful. You know, everyone focuses on the crit, and honestly, the crit's not really why you use Billy. It's a nice bonus, and sometimes you can get some, you know, really surprisingly large damage out of it, but he's mostly there for the quick damage from his NP. Just the fact that he can get it immediately, his NP is upgraded. So he's a good way to punch out a health bar or something like that, or clean up a boss. You know, so like if Robyn runs out of gas, you need a final hurrah, he can do that. And he has a survival skill, so it kind of makes sure he kind of gets the value off. So yeah, really solid unit. Nice that he's got the sure hit to kind of, you know, give him, you know, he's going to be able to do what he's supposed to do more often. Invulnerability, and you know, is pretty much the only thing that's gonna shut him down. So yeah, good unit. Not quite as good as Robyn, but very handy. I think the biggest problem is just the fact that he is so skill rank dependent. A lot of people don't bother getting his second skill to 10, and it's kind of hard to do the thing that he does so well without it being at 10. So Visibran. So if you have Poster Girl, this guy goes up so hard on the tier list, and he's just absolutely phenomenal. He's still good regardless of that, you know, like especially against AoE bosses, and you can kind of control when he dies. He can be very useful. He gets his NP, you know, pretty much immediately. You can double NP if you want. The main thing though is his third skill. He's mostly there for the pretty massive amount of survivability he can give the team if you can control when he dies. You know, it's 3-hit invulnerability, big heal. That if you got that, you know, 1 or 2 units that you're, you know, the whole team is revolving around protecting them. You know, he's really good for that. But if the boss is single target NP, so you don't know who they're going to hit, and you don't have Poster Girl, you know, he's not nearly as good. Still solid, and you know, I go out of my way not to use Poster Girl in my videos, and I still find time to use this guy fairly often. But if I was willing to use Poster Girl, I would use this guy just so much more than I do. But he is a very, very good unit, very unique, and you know, he still does an okay job as an AoE caster, but he's definitely not as good as like Caster or Babbage in that department. But yeah, solid, fun, unique unit. Okay, Uriel. So this is the other placement that's going to be really controversial, but yet again, I really stand by this one. Most people, you know, kind of view her as the best 3-star in the game, and oh my god, how is she not S tier, yada yada yada. But I mean, she's fallen off pretty hard in the last 2 years. She does not get used very often. And even back in her heyday, she was still niche. I mean, she's got to be fighting a male. It doesn't have to be a saber necessarily. Her bonus damage is large enough that she can be pretty handy against like extra classes. You know, she's not, if you're fighting a caster, she is not going to outperform Ushi against a caster generally. Although if you maybe you're doing double Uriel, she might, because of the charm lock. But really, the reason she's A rank is because, yeah, she still can be really good and she can be helpful against extra classes that are male, but, you know, she's terrible against females. I mean, truly terrible, because she has no survivability, no utility, you know, not very good damage. I mean, she's one of the absolute worst archers in the game if you're fighting a female or a genderless opponent. And then even when you're fighting males, a lot of times nowadays, she absolutely gets outclassed by Robyn, because most major Saber bosses now have debuff immunity, or I'm sorry, mental debuff immunity. Just overwhelmingly they do that. You know, Sitting Master, the twins, and everything, Surtur, Sigurd. You know, she just, you know, she still gets big damage on them, absolutely. But without the charm, she's just big damage and nothing else. And if you want to build a team around her and just do the big damage, you can do that. But Robyn also gets big damage, and Robyn has the command codes now to make his poison super consistent, and then Robyn also gets the stars and the survivability. It's just much better. You know, she's not bad, and that's why she's still A rank. People are going to act like A rank is garbage tier. It's absolutely not. When her niche does come up and the boss is Saber and male and charmable, she is so good. She's like, you know, SSSSS tier, you know, it's insanity. But that just doesn't really happen anymore. It's pretty rare, and even when it is one of those situations, it's not like, you know, Robyn doesn't get the job done either. So, good unit, but I really do feel like she's been overhyped, because when she's good, she's so good. But then people overlook how often that she's just not applicable to the situation at all. And because so many bosses now have mental debuff immunity, I think that's hurt her a lot. But her damage is still very solid against males, regardless of all that, so she's absolutely not bad. Fuma, very good unit. He's gotten way better over the years. You know, they've buffed him a lot. He's got excellent utility, attack down, crit down, defense down, buff block. I mean, pretty much all the utility. You know, his buff block is for only 1 buff, opposed to Clown Boy's, which is 3. So if you strictly need the buff block, I do think Clown Boy is better. But a lot of times the buff block is just a nice bonus, and you'd rather have all the other stuff. You know, he's got so much defense down, he's almost like a damage support. And he's got the crit down on demand, which is nice, and you get a little bit of attack down as a bonus. And then his NP actually hits quite hard for an AoE. I think he's actually better than a lot of the 4-star AoE assassins, very much so. Especially if you need his utility, then he actually smokes them. But really, I think a lot of times he's going to perform better than, like, you know, Assassin, Scath, and Gray. I mean, he's really solid, great unit. Izo, super good assassin. I think a lot of people think he's the best 3-star assassin. I really don't think he is. I've compared him a lot to 100 Face. Grailed, non-grailed, team play, solo, and overall I think she's definitely better. I do think Izo's better out of the box. He's not as skill rank dependent. 100 Face is extremely skill rank dependent, so that's definitely in his favor. He's still super good. He does everything you want out of a budget DPS. You know, he's got a self-survival skill. He's, you know, very, very easily he can show up, get his MP off once or twice, get a crit turn in, and, you know, he's gotten his value. So very, very solid unit. The main reason I think 100 Face is better is she has an upgraded NP, he doesn't. She survives longer than he does because she can use her heal, then use her evade, then use her heal again, because, you know, her cooldowns are pretty short. You know, she gets her damage regardless if the enemy's a servant or not, and you got bosses like Bull of Heaven and stuff that, you know, are not servants. And then she got the utility with the art defense down, which results in more stars on art cards, which is awesome, and more damage. She has crit down. As I keep saying, crit down is just an absolutely fantastic debuff. So honestly, she is a good bit better than him. Now that as I'm talking about it, it's like she really is ahead of him in many ways. But he's still fantastic. You know, he gets the job done. You know, he's got everything you need out of a budget DPS, and they work super well together because they're both art assassins. He'll benefit from her art resistance down. She can help get crits to him and stuff like that. So they work fantastically together. He is limited, unfortunately. He's had a good number of raid ups, but yeah, he is limited. So tough to get for a lot of newer players. Okay, Hohenheim. So ever since his 3rd skill buff, just such a bananas unit. It's crazy how much this guy went up in power when they buffed his 3rd skill. He can result in, you know, budget teams looping art NPs quite easily. You know, he gives you a nice full damage up. He gets his own NP really easily, so if you need to, you know, get an overcharge for another NP or wipe out some weaker enemies, he can do that really well. Great farming unit, great challenge quest unit. And give, you know, guts to somebody else. But, you know, you mainly use his third skill for the NP gain, and it's just so much NP gain, it's super good. Does not get used as much in challenge quests as farming, simply because, you know, you don't always need AoE. You know, single target's more prevalent for boss fights, I would say. It's still a solid, you know, art support in general, works well with Mozart and stuff like that. Just really good unit. Rookie boy, I have absolutely no idea how to say this guy's name. Super good unit, can loop his NP very easily, has, you know, solid survivability. He doesn't have hard survival like an evade or an invulnerability, but he gets the nice defense up. The big issue is he's got all this damage and stuff, but he doesn't have an upgraded NP, so a lot of that damage is just kind of going into offsetting that, but he can loop very easily, and even though he does not have an upgraded NP, the damage is still extremely high. And I really cannot stress just how easy it is to loop with this guy. Overall, I do think Ushi is better. She's more general use, but they work very well together. A lot of times you need more than one rider, especially when you're doing more budgety setups. And he can definitely be better than her if you got a more loopy focused setup. But I do think Ushi's better because she's got the hard survival, she's got some buffs for the team. Oh, I mean, so does he, but I do think she's a bit better. But yeah, they work great together. She even gives him the NP gain up, which works great. He's a bit skill rank dependent, especially if you want him to do the suicide thing. You know, you want to make sure you're getting enough damage out of it to be worth it. His taunt is nice. It's a nice option. You know, taunt is super useful in challenge quests and stuff, and especially in like AoE challenge quests where you're fighting multiple different classes and you're having to like pick key ones off and stuff. He can kind of, you know, show up, pick off a caster one or a berserker one, and then either just die because of his second skill or taunt and then eat an NP for you. That's very useful. I'm telling you, man, taunts are just so fantastic in this game, and the fact that he can throw out some damage and then maybe protect another key DPS who's getting ready to use their NP, right, and he can save them with his taunt, it's great. So he gets his value in, he protects someone else so they get their value. It's very good, very good. Honestly, I've used him a fair bit, but he is newer, and I haven't tested him as much as I would like. So there's definitely a chance he might actually go up on this tier list, but so far I do feel confident that overall Ushi is better. So with Caesar and Bedivere, this is one of those cases where I'm not saying Bedivere's better because he's, you know, more to the left. They're pretty much tied. It's almost entirely apples and oranges at this point. You know, they've buffed Caesar's NP now, and his NP hits so hard, it's wild. But sometimes you don't need that much damage. You know, you have break bars, and it can just go into the void. Also, Caesar doesn't get his NP as quickly. His gain rate is garbage. He has no survivability whatsoever. But Caesar gives the team a nice. He's a damage support. You know, he's a nice budget damage support, and then he does a crap load of damage himself. And he makes some stars and stuff, so, you know, good unit. Bedivere is kind of similar in that Bedivere also hits super hard with his NP, but Bedivere gets his NP quicker. He has some survivability, not much. You know, he's got the defense up. But Bedivere doesn't hit as hard as Caesar. The main reason why Bedivere and Caesar are A+ and not S tier, they have the damage. They have the damage to be S tier. It's the survivability, the lack of survivability for both of them. You know, it can make a problem. Thankfully, Bedivere gets his NP so quickly that he can offset that, and then with Caesar, he just does so much damage. Sometimes it's just what the doctor ordered. But yeah, the lack of survivability keeps them out of S tier. But they're both fantastic, and they're pretty much the way to go for budget savers, right? You need a budget saver, they're your guys, and they'll do super well. All right, Asclepius. So almost S tier, and he's easily S tier in certain, you know, context. Pretty much the budget guy for dealing with debuffs. Does so well at shutting down debuffs. It's insane. Gives your team some battery, which is really nice. You know, he has that giant heal. So if you got that like that NV piece of DPS you're trying to, you know, keep alive throughout the fight, and he can kind of show up, put them, you know, nearly back to full. You know, very good unit. Great with if you happen to have a regular K-scope. You don't need MLB K-scope because his own NP battery is 20%. So he can show up instantly, use his first skill to get a big heal, and then heal again with the NP, give everyone guts, give everyone debuff immunity. Really good. And even if you have to wait a turn or two to get his NP, I mean, he's still super good. Unfortunately, he's story locked, much better than being limited. You know, he's in, you know, the caster rate ups and things like that. I really recommend gunning for this guy as a free-to-play. Even as a whale, sometimes you're going to want this guy. Like, his anti-debuff stuff is so strong. It's just fantastic. Super, super good unit. The main thing that keeps him out of S tier is just the fact if there is no debuff element to the fight, a lot of times you may still want to use him, but not all the time, right? You know, a lot of times Hans will be better, David, that kind of thing. But yeah, he's really good even if there is not debuffs, and if there is debuffs, he's just, I mean, absolutely amazing. Super good unit. I'm really glad they added him to the game. I really wish he was not story locked because there really aren't any other low star options for dealing with, you know, heavy debuffs coming your way. Like, what are you gonna do? Use Sanson? Like, oh boy. We got the S tier of the 3 stars, which this is pretty much the best, you know, in their role for the budget people. Thankfully, all of these are unlimited in the FP Gacha, so that works out really well. So 100 Face, I think, is absolutely the best budget assassin. I mean, she's incredible, can outperform 4 stars, and even some of the more 5 stars, to be honest. She scales fantastically with Grails. If she is Grailed, I mean, she keeps up with anybody. So much survivability, it's absurd. The big problem with her is the fact that she's so skill rank dependent. You know, she really wants to be 10-10-10. You want those minimum cooldowns so you can heal early on, then use the second skill, and then when that wears off, then you use the heal again, and then hopefully that's kept in it long enough to get your evade again. You know, you see where this is going. She loops super easily. The more she NPs, the easier it gets to NP because she keeps putting art resistance down on the target. I mean, she's super straightforward. She just, you know, you see blue, you click blue, and you end up making a lot of stars because of her art resist down and her first skill, and you end up NPing over and over again. You get lots of crit down. It's just super solid unit, loads of survivability. The only thing bad about her really is the fact that she is more of a long-term unit. Some of the shorter, some of like the more bursty fights are kind of designed around, you know, get NP super fast. You know, she doesn't have a battery, anything like that. A lot of people say the art up being RNG sucks, and it's not awesome, but it doesn't really matter. Even if the art up misses, she's still so good because she has so much survivability. Her NP's upgraded. Just, you know, she has everything you want. Big damage, can loop, loads of survivability. So with Ushi, not really saying she's any better than 100 Face. I think they're pretty much the same. If anything, I might even favor 100 Face a little bit. But Ushi's super good. You know, she has loads of damage up for herself. She can hit incredibly hard for a 3-star. She has quick up, attack up, upgraded NP. She has an evade, so she can, you know, live long enough to do what she needs to do. She gives NP gain up to the whole team, which is super handy. You know, her star generation on her NP is kind of a joke, but you know, she's great. You know, massive damage, solid survivability. You know, good stat line, not as skill rank dependent as 100 Face, so that's a good thing. But yeah, just everything you want out of a budget DPS. You know, she's like, if she just had the attack up and the quick up, you know, and didn't have an upgraded NP, you know, she'd still be good. But the fact that she has all that and the upgraded NP and the survival and the NP gain, it's just super simple kit, one of the most vanilla kits in the game, but extremely effective. Robyn Hood is super good unit, as all of the S tiers are. It's just, I don't even think I need to explain this. I mean, he just slaughters Saber bosses. If you have to use, you know, a unit at neutral, he's gonna do really well compared to like the similar units of other classes. Good NP gain, massive damage. The only problem he really had was, you know, if the enemy had magic resistance, but now they've got the poison command codes, and I think you're crazy not to give them to him because, I mean, Serenity doesn't really get any, her poison gimmick is not that good, where Robyn's is incredible. You know, he gets huge damage, doesn't matter if they're a dragon, if they're a male, female, genderless, doesn't matter, just always gets really big NP damage, can double NP quite easily, combos with Mozart super well, you can get multiple crit turns because you got his star gen skill, then Mozart's star gen skill, just very powerful, you know, has survivability, has sure hit, there's nothing bad about this guy, he's fantastic. I guess the only somewhat negative thing is his normal card damage is not that great, but I mean his NP damage is so high. You're only using his normal card damage to build up your NP anyway, so it doesn't matter very much. Super good. You could definitely argue he's better than Ku. Obviously they're applicable in different situations, but I mean Robyn is phenomenal. Good old Ku. I don't think anyone is surprised that he is really high on this tier list. Incredible 3-star. He's kind of famous for being a last man standing unit or a solo unit, and obviously he's incredibly good at that, but he's also a really good front row unit. I think a lot of people don't realize this, because he has so much survivability pretty much anytime the boss decides to attack him. That attack is just going into the void and basically just wasting it, so he's kind of like a tank. Because he has an upgraded NP, he actually can serve as a pretty solid DPS. He definitely does not have the best DPS in the game by any means, but he still has solid DPS. The sure hit is a really nice niche. He can deal with debuffs very easily. His debuff clears a 5-turn cooldown. If they have Pierce and Vulnerability, he's got Guts. If you're on this channel, I don't think I need to explain this. Even if he's not Grailed though, he's so good. I have a 1 to 3 star account where I don't grail anything, and I only use 3-star craft essences and stuff, and I mean, and Ku is the go-to Lancer all of the time, and he's, when you're fighting Berserkers and stuff like that, he's still like the top pick. Great unit. I can't think of anything bad to say. He's really good. I guess if he had an NP battery, that would be really nice. But he lives so long, he's going to get value. He's going to get a lot more value than most units because he lives so long. Turn to turn, like on turn 2, he's probably not going to accomplish as much as what some other units can do that can get their NP really fast and all that. But he's going to live so much longer than them. The total value you get out of these units is incredible. And as I said earlier, he's a great, last man standing or a solo unit. I don't think this needs to even be talked about. Yeah, I mean, to this day, fantastic unit, super, super strong. Debatable the best 3-star in the game, but I put him behind David because David is just good always. He's just good always. This guy's insane. I use David against Lancer bosses, for crying out loud. He is the budget support. He can save your entire team from an AoE NP or from a single target NP. He has an art deck which works great for what he does because he's basically helping the team's NP gain. Ultimately, that's perfect for him. He's got his first skill, so after he gets hit once, you can use his first skill to heal it back, and then if he gets hit again, he'll take less damage. He's got a damage buff for the team. As a bonus, if there's some evade bullshit going on, his NP has sure hit on it. He's not much of a damage dealer, but he's got some damage. But as a support, he's just incredible, and you can do double David nonsense, which is just ridiculous. So yeah, I put him above Ku and Robyn and everything just because those units are great, but you normally are going to use Ku against archers and maybe berserkers, right? And you're going to use Robyn against sabers and so on. Where David, you pretty much just use all of the time. He's easy to work into any team. Even if you're a whale, this guy's good because, like, a lot of people think, oh, but Merlin's just better. He actually does have something over Merlin, and that's, Merlin's invulnerability buff just lasts 1 turn and it's gone. David's evade lasts forever. So you can have like a taunt wall. You could have St. George. You use David's evade turn 1, but then George has taunt. So the boss can't ping off the shield off of everyone else. And then so by the time they do ping off the shield, the cooldown's almost back and you can do it again, right? Very, very powerful. I really, just like I've said with a few of these units, this is one of those units everybody should level, especially as a free-to-play. You're crazy not to level David, and you should absolutely focus on getting that second skill to 10. On any time I make a new account, I've played through this game with a bunch of different accounts. One of my top priorities is get David's second skill to 10, get George's taunt to 10, get Mozart's third skill to 10, get Ku's protection from arrows to 10. Those skills are so high impact, and they get so much with a low cooldown that it's worth the effort. You might have to grit your teeth a bit, but David is such a worthwhile unit. So often when I see new players struggling in this game, one of the main reasons they're struggling is they don't have David. And if they're looking for advice, a lot of times it's like one of the best piece of advice you can give them is put David on the team, and that's going to help you a lot. He's great against so many bosses. Yeah, David, best 3-star in my opinion. All the S tiers were fantastic, and if you're fighting an archer specifically, I think Ku is the best 3-star. If you're fighting a saber specifically, I think Robyn is the best 3-star. But I find David is just so applicable so often. He the man. So yeah, that's it for the 1 to 3-star tier list video. I'm probably going to do a 4 and 5-star one. It might take a while because there's so many freaking gold units in this game. I mean, look how long this took. Look at how long this took. So it might be a minute. I'm gonna split up the 4 and 5 stars into 2 separate videos though, and maybe even into more than that. I might have to go class by class, or cavalry classes in one video and knight classes in the other, or something like that, because there's just so many of them. But yeah, this is my first time doing a video like this, so I'd like some feedback, kind of if y'all want to see more of this or not, that kind of thing. But yeah, that's that, and peace.